Good evening. I'm Derek Fildebrandt. Welcome to a special edition of The Pipeline. Tonight we're going to be analyzing the federal leaders debate of this election we're in right now. Tonight I'm joined by Jonathan Denis, who's staring into a mysterious corner of his office. Jonathan is the former Minister of Justice and Solicitor General of Alberta. He currently has a practice in Calgary, Guardian Law. How do you doing, John?
Doing really well. How are you, Derek?
What? I don't know. I just watched that, so it could be better. We're also just joined by Jeff Calaway. Jeff Calaway is the former president of the Wild Rose Party of Alberta under both Danielle Smith and Brian Jean. And he is the president and CEO of High Ground Medica in Calgary. How you doing? Jeff, can you hear us? Okay, it seems Jeff is either on mute or cannot hear us. So our folks in technical will have to work this out.
There we go. There we go.
Oh, Jeff, how you doing?
Yep, good.
Well, gentlemen, we've had 3 French debates and one about climate change and Quebec. Quite something. I know you are all watching with me. Why don't you give us your initial thoughts? Let's start with you, Jeff.
You know, with the Green Party leader, I mean, I'm putting in this no particular order, but with the Green Party leader, it was basically a message of, can't we all just get along? With Blanchet, you know, he's obviously, this isn't his home turf that he's debating on right now, being the English language debate, but he did seem a little more calm and composed, I guess. And obviously everything just revolves around sending more money to Quebec. And, you know, logic be damned. Let's just stop all resource development, dismiss all those, you know, foreign oil tankers running into Quebec to keep their economy going. So that was interesting. Trudeau, you know, he's a little bit combative. I do have to say he talked a little bit about the most substantive things in his government, but the problem is he's been there for 6 years, and frankly, he is just a lot of show instead of a lot of action. We're all pretty well aware of the big promises that he makes, and then he never actually does fall through. I was glad that I didn't make a bet with you guys to and start a drinking game about every time Harper's name was mentioned, because I think we'd all be on the floor about 30 minutes into the debate. So as far as O'Toole goes, you know, he's probably he's the leader, obviously, that's on the stage that was calling for. He was the only one, frankly, that really called for any kind of spending constraint, which is speaks to affordability in this election and in the country. Because of course, if you've got government, a federal government actually pushing policies and legislation that are going to really increase the cost of living, which I thought was actually quite ironic and hypocritical to have a whole topic on affordability, and more or less all of their answers revolved around increasing more spending for everyone, because ultimately that all just hits the pocketbooks of average Canadians. We need a government that actually gets some of their spending under control. Didn't hear much detail on that tonight, but I would say that O'Toole definitely was the only one that at least hinted at that. It's always not exactly politically popular, but we are getting to a point where there's a lot of desperation in Canada. And I think the clear contrast to that is actually Singh, who his answer was just basically keep spending more money on everything over and over, and you're not spending enough. Clearly, that would be an economic disaster for Canada. If you think affordability is bad now, I mean, you'll just see the Canadian dollar decline and debts rise. And, you know, we've been through some tough times in past decades in this country dealing with overspending governments. Trudeau's father, you know, a big culprit of that. And that never ends up well. So he was probably, I would say, almost the most concerning of the speakers I heard tonight. And I will say, actually, for someone, you know, looking at there was an Ecos poll that was out today that's indicated that Bernier's PPC party is at 11% and at 19% in Alberta. And of course, but the only thing we heard about Alberta tonight is how they want to shut down lines, and Alberta's such a bad place, more or less, and we should shut down our economy. But other than that, I think he would have provided a very differentiated viewpoint relative to the other leaders that were on stage tonight. So,
okay. Well, I asked for general thoughts. I didn't need every chapter of the book there, Jeff. Thanks. Okay, Jono, I know you're watching this with anticipation. You're obviously a close political watcher. Well, give us your general thoughts. We're gonna dive into each of the leaders and some of the major happenings that took place in the debate. But why don't you give us your general thoughts about how the evening went?
So, full disclosure, I did work on Erin O'Toole's leadership campaign, and I am a Conservative Party member and supporter. That being said, the first observation I had is I really did not like the moderator this evening. I felt she was constantly interrupting. I felt that she was quite biased. She asked some very leading questions of both the Bloc Québécois and Conservative leaders with preconceived notions, the type of thing like, well, I'm a lawyer, okay, so the type of thing in court that you could not ask your own witness. You can't ask your own witness leading questions. So I didn't really like the debate that much. The biggest issue, though, I really think that they talked about at the beginning was leadership and accountability. Okay, the big thing I take about this is that I didn't even watch Jimmy Kimmel tonight because the biggest joke was the NDP and the fact they don't know how to pay for their promises. They've never formed a federal government before, and so they can promise these pie in the sky programs with no idea how to pay for them, whatever, other than quips like, we're going to tax billionaires. Well, there's very few billionaires in this country. They got a lot of money, but at the same time, that is just a quip designed to appeal to their left-wing base of voters. I thought that the Bloc Québécois leader lost a lot of credibility when he talked about complained people about racism, but at the same time, he supports these religious restriction laws in Quebec, which don't even satisfy a charter challenge. They've got to invoke the notwithstanding clause. I would say O'Toole had the nicest tie, but I would say that O'Toole really is looking more and more like a polished leader. Trudeau was on the defensive the entire time, and he starts to speak fast, even maybe as fast as I even speak. But I really felt that he feels the pressure here. He's been down on the polls the last few weeks. And he began this election. It really reminds me of a couple of governments. David Peterson syndrome in 1990. You call an early election and you end up losing. We don't have a reason for this election. All of the other party leaders brought this up because that's clearly something on the minds of the Canadian voter. Why are we going to an election? We have an international crisis in Afghanistan. And on top of that, we have a COVID pandemic here. There was no need for this election.
Yeah, I got to pick up on that point there, Jonathan. There was, I felt, not a lot of real substance in this debate tonight. We talk about affordability, but just the nature of the debate, everyone ends up giving a few talking points, and there's not a lot of real substantive. The questioners, I give them credit for trying to nail them down on some specific topics, but they all are used to, well, there's a saying about question period in Ottawa. There's a reason why it's called question period, not answer period. So they're actually
in Ottawa.
They're all very well practiced at avoiding, anything substantive and being pinned down. But one of the things that honestly is a little bit near and dear to my heart that I think a lot of Canadians have really noticed over the past few weeks is just that tragedy in Afghanistan and what we see is unfolding with the Taliban coming back into power there. Canada and Western Canadians, Albertans, wherever you are on the spectrum or however you feel about Canada, I think we do honestly share some real common values about who we are as a country, our history, how we are a country that a number of peoples who have come here to create better lives. We share with each other willingly. We want the best for people. We are a beacon of hope. We've got a proud peacekeeping history as a nation, and yet we've got a government in this Trudeau government that had fair warning from our intelligence services and from partners around the world, and yet it was this government, Trudeau, who is still technically prime minister right now, who had the ability and the authority to save like literally hundreds of people's lives. Canadians, people who were wanting to emigrate from Afghanistan, people who've helped our Canadian forces and volunteers and contractors over in Afghanistan to help them create a better life as a democratic country, and to provide opportunity for women and to provide education for people. And it's absolutely morally abhorrent that we have abandoned the people in Afghanistan that were, standing in sewage ditches, trying to cling to landing gears on airplanes, trying to flee just what is an absolute tragedy. I mean, we saw today that Afghanistan, the Taliban, they appointed a central banker whose profile picture has him holding a big, huge weapon with no actually formal understanding. That country's going to, apparently it's a surprise to everyone except Trudeau what's going to be happening in that country. But the point being that points to the values of our leadership, what this election and what the priorities of this prime minister that we do have right now are all about. And that needs to be held accountable. So,
okay.
Even if you're not, if you look at exclude everything else, what do we actually want in our leaders, no matter where you are in Canada right now? That is, as much as anything else, something that we as Canadians should think about as we go to the polls on September 20th.
Okay. So let's. I don't want to make this all about the moderator, but let's just talk about that real quick and get that out of the way. I know Jono had some comments. She did seem to be particularly partisan. She, at least in the sense that she had a very strong ideological point of view. The preambles of her questions. She essentially accused Erin O'Toole of being a homophobic climate change conspiracy theorist, or that he was harboring them. Those are her words. So she certainly did seem to have.
If I could jump in on that.
Well, hold on. I'm actually going to come back to you in a second, Jono, because you're the one who started the moderator. But where I did think she was good, I actually didn't mind her interruptions for the most part. She was, I think, really good at keeping them on time and on topic, because you've got 5 leaders up there. They're talking over each other already quite a bit as it is, and it is hurting cats. It's a pretty thankless job being the moderator of a debate like that when the stakes are so high. I think she did a pretty good job of keeping order, keeping them on topic. I think it was just her ideology obviously came through. It's difficult for it to not come through, but also just the debate commission, the way it selected these questions was ridiculous. These kind of broad themes where we talked only about a couple of things all night. We talked about climate change for roughly a third or a quarter of this. Obviously, First Nations reconciliation, I think, absolutely deserves some time. Maybe not a quarter, because there's a lot of topics to get to. I mean, there wasn't a section reserved for Afghanistan. I think there was some popular outcry. They got at least a question slipped into there under one of those topics. But there wasn't any section dedicated to balancing the budget, taxes, finances, the West, none of this. So I think the format was pretty poor in that sense.
Finances. It was just about spending more money. That was the answer.
Yeah. Well, there was no questions, or there was at least no segment about balancing the budget or a segment about finances. Evan Sullivan at the end got in a tiny little question, which Trudeau did not answer, about balancing the budget, and everybody took that for granted because there obviously is no plan. It'll balance itself. But I don't know. I think being a moderator of a debate like that is tough. I'm pretty unforgiving of it. But her ideology aside, I think she did a pretty a good job in a tough position there. But I think Jono might disagree with me. Oh, is Jono gone?
Well, I'll just pick up on what you were saying there, Derek, about, one of her questions was, given 25% of Canadians are skeptical about climate change, how do you propose we get to unanimity? And I'm just thinking to myself, okay, no matter what you're thinking here, apparently the moderator thinks we've got to get to 100% groupthink on a particular topic. I mean, it's kind of a similar thing regarding vaccinations. I'm very pro vaccination myself, but I also believe it should be a personal choice. But this is why we live in a free country where people can make these choices, and that's got to be respected. I think that we are seeing in all of the commentary that we're hearing from the leaders tonight, bigger programs, more spending, more controls, more, all across the board. And I think actually the APTN questioner was kind of interesting in her comments about holding Trudeau to account on providing resources for First Nations and the reserves. How, there's been more spending. There's two big new departments to deal with First Nations, but and trying to help the First Nations, but none of it actually gets down to the reserve. It just results in more bureaucracy, more programs.
So,
and Trudeau even.
So I want to run through. So I want to run through the different leaders on the stage here. Actually, maybe we will start first. You had mentioned this. Well, we'll start before we go through the leaders. Let's start with the leader who was not there. Maxime Bernier, leader of the People's Party of Canada, not invited by the federal government's debate commission. They had a certain set of criteria about how to get in that he did not meet, apparently, at first. He had to have an average of 4% in the polls to qualify to get in, and apparently he was just below that when they were doing their polling average. But he has since then far, far exceeded the polling requirements to get in. ECOS today had him at 11. Main Street, I think, has got him around 9. Either way, he is the very clear fourth party right now, well ahead of the Greens. Oh, Corey Morgan has decided to pop out of his hole. Okay, well, we're going to go to Corey in a second here, but we're going to go through each of the leaders. But right now we're going through Maxime Bernier, who was not invited. He's now well ahead of the polls that are required for him to get in fourth place. As I said, ECOS having him at 11 has him right on the tail of the NDP, which is at 15. Just another 4 points and he'd be tied for third. I think it was a shame that he was not there. Even if you don't like what he has to say, at least it would have added some variety and some. It was such a polarized and loud debate for 5 leaders who seemed to more or less agree on all of the big questions. The only debate seemed to be on some rather marginal differences, disagreements on the margins about how to implement some of these big ideas, which they all agree with. I think it would have really added some spice if we had Bernier on the stage. Unfortunately, he wasn't. But let's go to Corey. Just your thoughts on Bernier's exclusion from the debate and what it might have meant for him to have been involved.
Well, it would have brought a unique perspective in. I think most of what this debate ended up coming out about was how the leaders were presenting themselves. I didn't see much new in policy or approaches. It was all pretty predictable out of them. We heard everything we'd expect to hear from them. Bernier would have brought in one voice for smaller government, one voice unapologetically speaking against restrictions and lockdowns, whether people agree with it or not, because there was no real debate on any of that. And it was a loss not to have that voice, whether one agrees with it or not. Annamie Paul did what she could, but realistically, she's not representing much. It's a party in shambles, and that spot would have been better held by Bernier.
Well, I would tend to agree with Corey there because I have a really difficult time the fact that they allowed the Green Party, which they should, but then again, they exclude Bernier. And I'm not a Bernier supporter. So why did they exclude him? He's running a full slate of candidates just like the Green Party.
Yeah. Okay, well, I want to go through each of the leaders who were at the debate. I've got fairly extensive notes on everyone except for Trudeau. I just found that very little of Trudeau stuck out. The main note I've got for him on my in my notepad here is that he was asked about why we're having an election right now when all of the parties in the House of Commons are supporting him. He has no question about holding the confidence of the House of Commons. He can continue to govern for a full 4 years, stick to the fixed election date, which is established by law. He was asked why, and he just could not answer that question. That's actually the biggest question he has to answer. That's the question every leader every premier, every prime minister that calls an early election needs to be able to answer on the very first day of the election. Why are we having an election? And if that answer is not a good and compelling answer, at least enough to make people forget about it, they get into trouble. And in my experience, and John, you were in that election too, Jim Prentice tried to frame a question about why we're having an early election in Alberta, at least he had an answer. And it was certainly a lot more compelling than Justin Trudeau's. It was still not a good answer, and he paid a big price for that because people were still talking about this early election come debate day. And we're on debate day now, and we're still talking about having an early election. Justin Trudeau was not able to answer that. But otherwise, he seemed defensive, angry, both defensive and offensive, but flailing around, trying to land a punch because he's behind in polls. Under the current vote, he probably, quite possibly, still continues as Prime Minister of a minority government. But I'd like to go to each of your thoughts about how Justin Trudeau, in particular, performed in the debate. Let's go to Jeff.
Yeah, well, I mean, he was a little bit feisty. He's got a lot to answer for. He's got a lot of words and show. As Singh pointed out, that he likes to, voice. He says a lot of things. He performs a lot. But at the end of the day, just like what that APTN interviewer stated, you're spending a bunch of money. The bureaucracy is growing like crazy. So maybe that's his job creation program, is more bureaucrats. But besides that, there's little to show on the ground. And when you want to talk about affordability, he repeated over a few times about, I've got your back. Well, I think a lot of Canadians feel like that's a knife in their back when they start looking at their utility bills and looking at what the cost of food is in their homes. And, I think that some of the leaders really could have gone after him more forcefully than that. I mean, there was the question from the senior on about affordability and for seniors, and it was basically just an answer of, we've got a variety, a grab bag of more money to give to seniors. I think really when you're a senior and you're talking about affordability, it really is things like your food bill, your utility bill, the cost of gas, and a lot of those issues and those affordability issues are caused by the very government, and are caused by the Trudeau, who's standing up there trying to speak about affordability and saying he's got your back. No, he doesn't.
Okay. John, do you think Trudeau's? I wouldn't say Trudeau's behind. He is technically behind 1 or 2, maximum 3 points, depending on which poll you look at. Although his vote is probably more efficient because it's not hyper concentrated like the Conservative Party vote, at least was in the West. So even if he was to get elected, even with a minority, without the most seats in a minority, he might still continue as Prime Minister. But either way, he is behind, and his visions of when a majority government was a twinkle in his eye when he called this election, that seems to be gone. Do you think he did what he had to do to try and make up that ground, consolidate the NDP's vote, that kind of progressive leftist vote behind him, and try to punch down the Conservatives a bit?
No, I really don't, actually. He was on the defensive the entire evening. He seemed very, very flustered, very, very irritated. 2015, the Liberals ran a quackerjack campaign. None of us here voted for them, but they ran a great campaign. They even elected 2 seats in Calgary for the first time in 40 years. 2019, it was okay. This time, their campaign is in the toilet. They're chasing their tail the entire time. It reminds me of a government that I was a part of when many of us, including me, told the leader not to call an early election. And then I drove down from Edmonton. I knocked on the doors of all of the supporters, and they said, "Why are you calling an early election?" You're chasing your tail the entire time. It's also very interesting, though, that Trudeau himself has lamented, I might call another election in 18 months. Well, why are we doing this? There's no purpose for this election. The interesting time, though, I just want to address one other comment that you had made, Derek. If in past elections, Conservatives had to be at least 5 points up because the vote is so consolidated. Alberta, Saskatchewan, bit of Manitoba, Eastern BC. This time, though, O'Toole's numbers are actually down a bit in Alberta. We can talk about that later. But they're up a bit in Ontario. The other thing is that I've always believed that Conservatives have a higher voter turnout. They have some of the best data, the best voting machine, the best get out the vote programs. And I do think that Conservative supporters are a little bit more motivated. Governments aren't elected. They are unelected. And in this particular instance, the people that want Trudeau gone are going to be more motivated to vote than the people that want him to stay for a third term.
Yeah. Okay, let's turn towards Conservative leader Erin O'Toole. I mean, in the absence of having Bernier on stage, he got to look the Conservative a bit. But Justin Trudeau kept on repeating, I can't emphasize how big the differences are between us. You need to make the right choice. These parties are so different. And Erin O'Toole's strategy seems very deliberately to be the polar opposite of that, trying to minimize the differences that, you can have essentially more or less the same government, but you can have a more competent and less corrupt and less narcissistic person leading it, trying to really play down those differences. The first question that went to Erin O'Toole from the Moderator, which I specifically pointed out, essentially said, you've got all these crackerjacks in your party, homophobes and people who are climate conspiracists, climate theory conspiracist, her terms. Who is driving the bus? And is it you or the caucus? And Erin O'Toole said very pointedly, I'm driving the bus, saying, forget those guys. They're essentially an electoral college. And he's not incorrect. That's the way the system works right now. The MPs, the caucus have remarkably little power in our system of government right now. So he wasn't lying when he said that, but he was going to pains to say he is the Conservative Party now. He's saying, I am the new leader of the new Conservative Party, trying to put a different coat of paint on things. He went to pains to talk about his, I'll use his terms, climate pricing, saying, I am going to put a price on climate change, etc. He did not call it a carbon tax. He has never called his carbon tax a carbon tax. He didn't call it here, probably aware that calling it that is probably a bridge too far for supporters, with his right flank already under significant fire from Bernier and the PPC. What I really wanted to see, and we'll talk a little bit about Blanchet in a bit, he had one really great moment, and Blanchet promised he would do this in the French debate. In the French debate, apparently, because I don't speak it, O'Toole apparently said that there should be no pipelines through Quebec, and he apparently said that in French. Taken translations at their word for it here. That night, during the French debate, Blanchet said, are you going to say that same sentence in English? And tonight, Blanchet had quite a moment, and he said, in the French debate, you said there should be no pipelines in Quebec. Will you repeat it right now in English? O'Toole did not reply. He just kind of smiled, played with the button on his jacket, and that was that. The moderators let him go because it wasn't his turn to speak anyway, but he probably could have intervened if he wanted to. That was a very interesting moment for me. And Blanchet was playing, again, I don't want to make this too much about Blanchet, but that stood out as a very weak point, probably the weakest point for O'Toole in the debate. That's kind of my summation, but why don't we go back to you, Jeff, about how you thought O'Toole did this evening?
Yeah, I didn't see any big moments. In fact, actually, if I actually had, I think the biggest moment of the debate was probably that Merrick fellow, the 18-year-old kid who was asking about reconciliation. So it's never a good thing when you've got a regular 18-year-old kid citizen who, at least in my mind, had the high point in the debate and held the leaders to account. But I will just kind of go back to more of an overall political strategy type of perspective for O'Toole. It's clearly they're running a different kind of a campaign versus the Scheer campaign a couple of years ago. Scheer, they were running up the score in lots of constituencies or ridings where they were, great. You went from 75% to 80% or 60% to 70%. It doesn't matter. You're going to win. But you got to go and win a bunch of those tough ridings in Ontario. So they've taken away all of the objections that have typically been thrown at the Conservative Party. I'll say these are politicians that we're talking about. So sometimes their promises aren't always followed through. I think that there is going to be, I am confident that the Conservative Party would definitely be much better than this liberal government on a number of fronts as a government. That being said, I think it's also very clear we're going to be in a minority government. But
Absolutely.
But at least you would get a much better government than what we're faced with today. So on items like kind of the flip-flop that we saw from O'Toole, or if you want to call it a clarification, but it probably more like a flip-flop on the gun issue, basically accepting Trudeau's position. Call it a levy, a fee, or a tax. It's a tax is a tax is a tax at the end of the day, and it is a type of carbon tax that he's basically backing. So he's taken away a lot of that ammunition from his opponents, particularly the Liberals. And so I see the strategic value of that. Take away the opposition, square the election, focus it on Trudeau, and that people are getting tired of Trudeau as the leader. They're getting tired of the empty words, and so and people are maybe looking for a bit of a change. This could be a bit of has the opportunity to at least be a bit of a change election, and that's really what in my view, what the Conservative Party platform is about. I mean, I'll get on my hobby horse. I think they should be nailing Trudeau and this Liberal government on the values of Canadians and how they walked away from that, at least as shown very bluntly in Canada's actions or lack of action in Afghanistan. But anyways.
Okay. We'll try to keep it tighter here because we want to get through everything before we go on too long. Quickly, Jonathan, how do you think O'Toole came out tonight? Do you think he achieved what he needed to achieve?
The biggest thing O'Toole needs to achieve is he needs to show stability and confidence. I think he did both of those things very well. He came across as a very polished debater. His cadence, his confidence, and just his air were all better than Trudeau's. And that is what he had to do. People know who Justin Trudeau is. People don't know Erin O'Toole that well. So he has to do that much better in the debate. And while there was no knockout punch, the only one in a Canadian prime ministerial debate I can recall is in 1984 when Mulroney knocked Turner out totally knocked him out. There wasn't a knockout punch, but I think O'Toole needed to do what he was doing to solidify the vote that he had and perhaps expand it further. Either way here, though, we're in a minority government situation. We're going to be having these discussions in 18 to 24 months again.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to say one thing too. We've seen just a little bit of decrease in the momentum of the Conservative Party here, I think, in the last handful of days, and it seems to be somewhat related to the gun issue being brought up. I'm not actually commenting on the flip-flop or otherwise. It just seems to come up, and so I have to say I was actually a little surprised that it wasn't brought up more against O'Toole tonight. So I think that actually worked in O'Toole's favor, and I'd agree with Jonathan that he put in a composed, polished performance. He's a very accomplished individual himself. He's very smart. He's very disciplined. And, that's, I think, a great credit to him as a leader and potentially the next prime minister of this country. So.
Okay. All right. So as I said, we're going to try and keep it quick here so we can get through in relatively timely fashion. Blanchet seemed to give a don't give an F vibe the entire debate. He obviously has the lowest stakes. I don't think many unilingual Anglophones were changing their vote tonight about if they're going to vote for the Bloc Québécois or not. So this is really just he's kind of playing to the home crowd in this sense. It's almost like an away game. This is like Calgary playing in Montreal. You get to show off what you're doing away, and so in that sense, he was very antagonistic towards English Canada. Very talked about. He said the Bloc would put a cap on Western energy production. I hadn't actually heard that before. I don't know if that was a policy that he's had yet or not, but it was absolutely flabbergasting for a leader that claims to represent Quebec, which takes an incredible amount of wealth from Western Canadians on a daily basis to fund its operations. Would say so, but not altogether surprising from what we know. He had a great line. He says, "I'm not that interested in running Canada, but let me tell you why I should be at this debate anyway." It was kind of a funny line, but I thought he made actually a fairly compelling argument about why, at least from the perspective of a Quebec nationalist, why the Bloc Québécois should hold the balance of power. He says, some of these parties are bad, some of them are slightly less bad, and the characters know who they are on the stage here, but none of them deserve a majority. They need a watchdog, and it will be an advantageous position for the Bloc Québécois to hold the balance of power and be the watchdog on the big parties forming government and parliament. And I thought that was actually a pretty salient argument about why the Bloc Québécois, from the perspective of a Quebecer, is actually a very good option, regardless of what side of the political spectrum you're on. But what really stood out with Blanchet for me was how every question was about Quebec. We had this entire segment about First Nations reconciliation, and essentially his answer to them all was, yes, First Nations have been mistreated, but you know who else has been mistreated? The Quebec nation. Yes, First Nations didn't sign treaties giving up their sovereignty. And you know who else didn't sign a treaty giving up their sovereignty? The Quebec nation. Everything was about him. Everything was about Quebec. And it got almost sad comical at a time. It's almost funny if it wasn't such a serious topic. But I'll go to Jonathan about...
Sorry, Jonathan, I'm going to jump.
Okay, we'll go to Jeff.
Yeah.
Jeff is raring to go. Jeff's chomping at the bit, so you go, Jeff.
Yeah. Just regarding Blanchet, I actually thought one of his best answers tonight was when Rosie Barton was trying to catch him on the seniors funding. And, he kind of started to give an answer, and she kind of like doubled down on her question. And, he kind of paused a little bit and thought, no, I thought there was a bit of a touch of emotion there. And he talked about how these people that have been working their entire lives, why shouldn't they also get the benefit of that? I guess the nature of the question was, why should you give all seniors money instead of only, those who actually need it themselves? And, his point was like, these people have worked hard and contributed and they need it. So I actually thought that was pretty interesting. But, just to kind of pick up on how you talked about putting a cap on Western energy production, he's clearly over and over and over always answers in whatever is in Quebec's best interest. And he'll take money from anywhere and anyone across Canada to do it. And it's never enough, just more and more and more. But at the same time, and Quebec rights expect, respect our nation, respect our province, everyone else butt out. But you know what? You can't produce energy, and I'm going to be totally on board in supporting whoever is, if it's a Liberal or God help us, an NDP government, stop the economy from growing in Western Canada. That's just quite fine by him to support. So it's quite a bit of hypocrisy there on his part, and also let's just be frank, double down here. He's got a couple of refineries in Quebec that they seem quite fine, taking oil in from Saudi Arabia. So anyway, but I will say the only other comment I'd have is, I don't know if you guys might remember, there was a movie back in the early 90s with Kevin Kline that was called Dave, and it's about a guy, the actual president dies, and then they find this community job finder guy, job search guy. They bring him in and install him as president because he's got a remarkable resemblance to the actual president. And he actually turns into be this nice kind of relatable guy that comes in and acts as president. And I sort of had almost a little bit of that feeling tonight. But again, that's when you don't really have much on the table. You get to be a little more just natural and less caring. So.
Yeah. Okay, Jonathan, do you Blanchet, has he got your vote? You gonna back the Bloc?
Well, first off, I live in Alberta, so I have no option to vote for the Bloc. But I will just offer this comment. Who could argue that the Bloc Québécois has not been successful in their mandate over the last almost 30 years since Bouchard broke through with 52 seats in the 93 election, formed the official opposition? They've been very, very effective in turning the agenda to Quebec and raising the specter of Quebec separatism. And as a result, we see where all the transfer payments go. So I'll give Blanchet some credit. He's breathed new life into it. He did quite well in the 2019 election. I will give him also credit that his English has improved, and his English is sure a heck of a lot better than my French is. But the blatant hypocrisy, he starts talking about, we want to put caps on the oil sands. Listen, the amount of oil that is being imported from politically unstable jurisdictions, transported across the world, when we have a politically stable supply of energy in Western Canada with high environmental standards, high social standards, again, in the same country. Why are you opposed to these pipelines? And instead, you're incurring more fossil fuels, more emissions to bring the energy from across the world. It makes no sense.
Okay. So we're going to go to discuss Jagmeet Singh, and there was some other lady on the stage. I think she was the independent candidate for Toronto Centre or something. She was going on about the environment or something. I'm not really sure who she was. I think she had one of those Seinfeld puffy pirate shirts on, but I couldn't quite tell. Jagmeet Singh, I think, if he's your cup of tea, I think he comported himself well. I mean, the man knows how to wear a suit. I think his answer to everything was spend. I think he got it. It was unremarkable. I don't think he's going to really break through too well, but I don't think he made any big mistakes. I think he more or less held his ground fairly well, and certainly stood out more than that lady from Toronto running for MP somewhere.
Yeah.
Let's go to Jeff.
Sure. Just regarding Anne Marie Paul, just briefly, really, other than a little bit on the environment, her only answer was, "Let's all just work together. We just need to work together."
Rainbows and unicorns.
Yeah, it was totally. She's going to lose her seat. Elizabeth May might keep hers, but this election's going to be a big downdraft for the Green Party. That's just the bottom line there. But besides that, on to Singh. Now, Singh, obviously, his answer is just spend more money on everything across the board. You can't have there's not a government program or a program you can invent that you couldn't spend more money on. And of course, for Canadians across the board, it doesn't matter your economic situation in life. Everyone's going to get hit at the end of the day. So that is just completely unfeasible. But the other thing that really struck me through the debate is he has a nice way about him in communicating, and a bit of a smile. And coming from the old Wild Rose days, Danielle Smith used to be very good at this too. She could deliver tough news or a tough line or a tough bit of love, but as she said, if you just do it with a smile on your face, people think it's kind of okay. And Singh kind of has that ability to do something very similar on that front. But when you actually listen to his words, and if you took away the voice and the picture and you read his words, he really acknowledges and I think stokes a lot of fear and anxiety for people in society. And I think that is actually ultimately kind of a bit of a dangerous quality, something I was just picking up on. I mean, you ask him a question and he's empathetic and he acknowledges, and then he accentuates whatever the thing that's driving that fear or that anxiety of someone, and that it acknowledges it rather than and doubles down on it. And I think it was just very apparent to me that it's something that contributes to the division in society rather than, let's sit down and have approaching something more of a, let's sit down and deal with the issue. It's accentuating those fearful feelings. And so that I hadn't ever really, I don't honestly listen to Singh very often, admittedly, but that was something that really kind of struck me tonight. So take away the picture and the smile and you think about the transcript, and you you can see that the politics of fear, anxiety, and division really kind of coming out in his words, actually.
Jonathan, do you think that Jagmeet Singh made up any ground tonight? Or how do you think he comported himself?
So I really watched Jagmeet Singh, and listen, there is nothing you can do to make me vote NDP, okay? But I'm going to say something nice about him. He has really improved as a leader. He articulates his image, his point. He speaks to his base. He's well learned. He's a smart guy. Okay. He obviously had a good background in the Ontario legislature as an MPP. The thing with the problem he has is that Trudeau has gone so far to the left. How does he define himself as different from Trudeau when he has been propping up the government on numerous occasions? The Liberal Party today is much different from the Liberal Party of the 1990s. Sure, under Chrétien and Martin, you got some annoying things like billion-dollar gun boondoggles that no one on this podcast would support. But at the same time, you also got balanced budgets. You got tax cuts. They reduced capital gains tax. They championed our energy sector. They brought in a international free trade agreement. I don't see any of this type under Trudeau. It is a very, very different Liberal Party. Much like his father, he has reached as far to the left as he can, alienated Western Canada. The question is, how does Jagmeet Singh define himself when Trudeau has been eating his leftist lunch the last few years?
All right. Well, I think we'll wrap it up there. It's already been a long evening. This broadcast is, God knows how long it's gone on. It's been going on since the leaders' debate started. I want to thank you both, Jonathan Denis and Jeff Calaway, for joining me this evening. And all of you who have been watching, some of you have stayed with us, some of you have not. But it's been a long, long broadcast. I want to thank you all for joining us. If you're not yet a member of the Western Standard, go to westernstandardonline.com and click on membership. You can try it free for 15 days. See if you'll like it. If not, well, then I'm sad. Thank you all very much for joining us this evening, and God bless.
Thank you.
Thank you.